Chapter 13. Comfort. Repay me by getting better. For what feels like ages, he puzzles over that. The handwriting is unfamiliar, though that doesn't surprise him. He can hardly recognize his own writing scratched into the dirt. No, what surprises him isn't the writing. It's the message itself. Get better. It's so ordinary. So gentle and kind a demand that he can't wrap his mind around it. She can't possibly be satisfied with so little. No one can ever accept such a small repayment for so much effort. Except that Zuko did. In Shusoku, the only thing he really wanted was to see the people finally be okay. He hadn't asked for more than that. And the Painted Lady was the same. She never expected any kind of repayment from the villagers. He can imagine her doing the same for a single stranger just as readily. Except that this time, Zuko is the stranger, and he has a hard time imagining why anyone would choose to help him, even with some sort of repayment. How is he worth it? But for some reason, the Painted Lady is still helping him. The package of food by his elbow is confirmation of that, as is the fresh blanket tucked beneath him and folded at the top to cushion his head. There is even a small stack of neatly folded clothes by the mouth of the cave. He can't reach them, and he wouldn't be able to change even if he could, but the clothes are there, brought back to him by the Painted Lady. As hard as he tries, he can't fathom her reasons, but she's still helping him. Zuko can't count on that to continue, but for as long as it does, he will be grateful. And confused. He can be both. And when she arrives shortly after sunset, he is struck by a mix of gratitude and confused relief. She's here. He doesn't know why, but she hasn't left him alone. He wishes he had the strength to sit up and greet her, but the best he can manage is raising his head a few inches before his strength fails and he sinks back down with a grimace. "You came back," he rasps stupidly. He should say something else, anything else, but no other words come to him. She's here. There's a soft buzz at the back of his skull, and he thinks he must be breathing too fast. The Painted Lady freezes a few steps outside of the cave, and by the faint light of the moon and the stars, he watches her hands tighten around a bundle. "I thought you would be sleeping." There is an odd, hollow quality to her voice, but even in that, there is something familiar. Recognition drifts nearer to the surface, but this time he doesn't try to grasp for it. If it comes, it will have to do it on its own. Zuko shakes his head faintly. "I don't think I could sleep at the same time 2 days in a row if I wanted to. It's ever since I got hurt." The Painted Lady looks away, and something pulls at the center of his chest. No. She seems upset, and she shouldn't be. He can't leave it like that. I can't remember everything." He stares up at the roof of the cave. He doesn't know how he's supposed to do this. He doesn't know how to stop her from being upset. How long has it been? 5 days. Zuko's breath hitches, but he manages a nod. 5 days. It sounds close enough, but 5 whole days. It's so long. How has she been coming back to help him for so long? "I thought I was going to die days ago." He isn't sure why he's saying this, but the words spill out of their own accord. Is Shusoku okay?" The Painted Lady nods and advances a few steps. "The village is fine. Some other towns sent people to help them." Good. Zuko breathes a sigh of relief and allows his eyes to close for a moment. Good. It feels like a weight has lifted from his chest. They haven't suffered in his absence. He can lie here and rest without harming anyone. I wasn't planning to come here, he rasps. I wanted to stay home, be with my family for a while. But my father sent me away the first chance he got. He opens his eyes again, and the words just keep coming. He said there was a rebellion in Shisoku. I was supposed to handle it on my own. But there wasn't any rebellion, just... He sighs and rests a moment before he's strong enough to continue. If my family doesn't want me, what does it matter if they think I'm a failure? I wanted to do things my way for once. While he's still speaking, she comes closer and crouches down beside him. Her hand, warm and soft, brushes across his forehead. Zuko frowns. Is he rambling? Does she think that he's feverish because he's rambling? Maybe he is feverish. Maybe that's why he can't seem to stop talking. Is there something wrong with me? Do I have a fever? Though it's hard to make out detail through the veil, he thinks that she frowns. She shakes her head. No fever. Have you eaten? He nods. Not very much, but... She touches his shoulder, her touch feather light, and it is enough to silence him. Good. That's good. You're being careful. Zuko looks away. That isn't it. Not quite. It's more that he was too tired, too shaky to take more than a few bites. But he thinks that she has a point. He remembers someone telling him that he could get sick if he ate too much after starving for days. It was probably Uncle. Probably when they were refugees back in the Earth Kingdom. Back when he thought that he'd never need that sort of advice again. He goes quiet as the painted lady pushes down his blanket and makes a quick examination of his chest before nodding and covering him back up. Your ribs are healing. Do they feel better? He can breathe without feeling like there are knives protruding from 100 different places in his chest now. There is still a lingering ache, and his heartbeat still feels too sharp, but it's nothing like it was before. A lot better. The painted lady doesn't seem to react, but it's difficult to tell through the veil. She picks up the water skin from beside him and weighs it on one hand. You've almost finished your water, too. Zuko nods. I'll refill your water. You should have enough food left for another day. She starts to pull away, and a jolt of irrational fear strikes Zuko in the heart. Is she leaving already? Is she planning to come back? He realizes that he doesn't want to be alone anymore. He's never cared much for being around people, but this kind of solitude, this kind of isolation, it's killing him. Even if he's safe here, he can't stand the uncertainty any longer. His hand catches against her elbow, and she stops. What is it? Zuko's mouth feels dry all of a sudden, and it becomes difficult to keep his hand raised. I don't know how much longer I can stand being alone here. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't like wondering when you're coming back, if you're coming back. I don't know who you are or why you're here, and that scares me. I'm scared. He forces himself to swallow all of that back. She's helping him. She has been for days, and he has to trust that she'll keep coming back. There must be a reason why she's still wearing the veil, still hiding her face, even though Zuko knows full well that she's human. She sinks down beside him again, and she checks his forehead with the back of her hand. Though that isn't the problem, though he knows that he hasn't developed a fever in the past 5 minutes, he clings to the sensation, to the closeness. I don't know what's wrong with me, he finally chokes out. I can barely do anything. You're recovering. Her voice is soft and more familiar than before. It's okay. You just ate for the first time today. It'll take a while for your strength to come back. He shakes his head. I can't move. It has nothing to do with strength. I've tried. I just can't. He squeezes his eyes shut. What happened to me? The silence lasts far longer than he likes, but then the painted lady finds his hands and holds them still. Something happened to your back when you landed that night. His eyes snap open. If that's the case, then he must be right. He must be. There's a lot of damage, she continues. It hasn't gotten any worse, but it's not healing either. She turns her head slightly, breaking her gaze away from his. I had to focus on the injuries that were killing you first. Now your back is all that's left. I just have to be sure you're strong enough to handle more healing. He tries to draw in a steady breath. Can you tell if it's ever going to heal? For another prolonged moment, there is silence again. Then slowly, she rises. Close your eyes. He hears soft footsteps, then a small scuffing sound, and her voice comes from near his feet. Tell me what you feel. Panic. He feels panic. He clenches his jaw and tries to press the fear back down. That isn't what she's asking, and he knows it. He feels his forehead crease as he tries to concentrate. It's dim, but he thinks he can feel a faint, prickling pressure in one of his ankles. A flood of relief strikes him, and he lets out a shaking breath. He can feel. My ankle, he says, barely above a whisper. Which one? The calm, the patience in her voice makes it a little easier to think. The right one. The pressure lifts and moves to the opposite leg. And now? His voice feels more certain this time. The pressure on his ankle is clearer this time, too. My left ankle. It's like you're pushing down on it. The pressure lifts again, and there is a light exhalation. You can open your eyes again. Zuko obeys. By the pale light outside the cave, he can see the painted lady in a clear silhouette, with just the faintest rim of light catching the soft contours of her face and her shoulders. Again, there is a flicker of familiarity just out of his reach. This time, though, he is almost afraid of what he will find if he ventures too close. I don't think you're really paralyzed, she tells him. Her voice is firm but gentle. If you still have feeling left, you might be able to move again. It's just too soon to know how much. Zuko manages a tight-lipped nod. For now, that should come as a reassurance. He can barely raise his head. Of course he can't walk now. And he has to believe that the painted lady is right, that there is at least a chance that his legs will work again. That's more than he could have hoped for a few days ago. A few days ago, even survival had been uncertain. But now, the thought of surviving frightens him more than he cares to admit. If he can't look after himself properly, he can't decide whether it's better or worse knowing that he can't go home. At the palace, there are servants and physicians to manage things like this. People who are duty-bound to provide anything he might need for the rest of his life. Out here, though, there is no one. He can't even ask for the kind of help he might need. Out here, no one will stand by him, and he might well starve if he isn't strong enough to take care of himself. And yet Azula is at the palace. So is Father. And even when Zuko was perfectly healthy, he was never strong enough for either of them. He remembers how readily they tossed him aside even when he was useful. A scarred and disgraced prince who can't walk? He'd be found dead in his room within days. He can't even convince himself that it would be Azula's doing. He can't find the energy to make excuses or to explain things away. Father burned Zuko. Father banished him. And when Zuko came back home, Father sent him away again. It burns him from the inside out, but he can't pretend that Father wouldn't do it. He wouldn't hesitate. One small opportunity, just a few minutes with the guards and servants looking the other way, and Father would make sure that there was no more crippled prince to mar the royal family. Easy. Her voice cuts through his thoughts, warm and soft. Try to breathe slowly. You're safe here. He tries to clench his fists, but his hands shake too badly with the effort. He stares at the darkness above him, unable to look her way. For how much longer? She hesitates. What do you mean? His jaw tightens painfully, but he forces himself to speak. I can't stay in this cave forever. If I don't get better... Hundreds of possibilities flash through his mind, too quickly to come into focus, but his heart beats faster and it's harder to keep his breathing under control. He barely feels it when a hand brushes against his leg. Can you try to move your feet? That should give me a better idea of how much healing I can do. Zuko tries to steady his breathing. She sounds sincere. She's trying to help. He needs to believe that. Still, it's difficult to nod. She taps his left foot. Try this one first. He tries. He closes his eyes and concentrates with all his might, and he feels something burning and crackling along his spine. What he can't feel is whether his foot is responding, and his pulse begins to race again. Good, she says, interrupting the horrified thoughts tearing through his mind. You did it. Not much, but it's a start. His breath leaves him in a rush, and he doesn't have time to recover it before she goes on. Now try the other one. He sees rather than feels her hand touch his right foot, and the hot, snapping sensation in his back resumes. He pushes himself a little harder, and all at once the world turns to a wash of burning red around him. There's a cry that sounds a little like his own voice, but he isn't aware of making it. All he is certain of is the shooting, sparking pain radiating outward from his spine, and the edges of his mind flickering with darkness around all the red. No. He can't remember whose voice that is, but it's close, and reality spins around him after the word dies in the air. I'm so sorry. Please, just hold on for me. Can you do that? Just hold on for a little while. Hold on to what? He can't feel the ground anymore. There's just pain spinning outward from his spine. I'm trying, okay? I'm trying to make it better. Just hold on. The coolness softens and spreads through his back, and as the burning redness gives way to light, the world begins to come back into focus. He feels warmth around his shoulders and wet all across his face. He feels the ground beneath his hand and pries his eyes open to find himself propped against the painted lady's shoulder. She's warm and soft and close, and Zuko turns inward, burying the scarred side of his face deeper into the scratchy fabric of her robes. His eyes leave damp smudges behind, but he doesn't care. It hurts, and she is the only escape he can find. He can still see the glow through his eyelids, and the painted lady cups her free hand around the back of his neck. Zuko tries to focus on the thumb stroking through his hair. Everything else is too big, too overpowering. At least this is gentle. I'm sorry, she whispers. I'm so sorry, I didn't want to hurt you. He wants to tell her that she didn't, that it was his own stupid body that caused him all this pain, but he can't find the words. It hasn't hurt like this since the night of the attack. Or maybe this is even worse. He can't really tell. Dizziness strikes him, and even held snug in her grasp, Zuko sways. Her breath shudders beneath his ear, and she leans down closer. How else can I help you? What do you need? She probably means water or blankets, something she can give him to make him more comfortable when she inevitably leaves. He doesn't want any of that. He doesn't care if it will make the pain ease. Zuko clings to a loose fold in her robes as though it will keep him anchored. Don't leave me, he begs, his words slurring together. Please, I don't want to be alone. She inhales sharply, and Zuko turns his eyes up toward hers, the scarred side of his face digging into the rough folds of her robe. Her hat is gone now, and the veil along with it. He always thought that recognition would come as a burst of light and clarity, but when it strikes, it's barely a ripple through the pain. His vision flickers and blurs around the edges, but he can see her perfectly well. She isn't the painted lady. Zuko knows those eyes, that face. He remembers her voice and recalls the first touch of her hand. He remembers her. But her name hovers out of reach, and it hurts too much to think. The strength drains from his limbs, and his eyes slip shut. She smooths his hair once more, then her hand stills, holding him steady against her shoulder. I'll stay until you fall asleep. Even after his breathing steadies and he goes limp in her arms, fast asleep, Katara can't bring herself to let him go. His voice just keeps echoing through her mind, small and pleading. Don't leave me. It's such a small request. It demands so little of her. How could she possibly refuse? That's what she tries to tell herself. It's easier than admitting how frightened she is. How terrified she was when he yelled out, plunging into agony with the simple act of trying to move. It's easier than thinking about how it felt to see him crying and helpless as his damaged nerves did their best to destroy him. Zuko's head rests in the space between her neck and her shoulder, and she counts the warm, shallow gusts brushing past her skin. Though he is comfortable enough to sleep, Katara can't ignore the way his forehead keeps creasing and twitching. She's managed to bind the tight, angry energy around his spine into a smaller knot and cut it off from its relentless spread to his other nerves, but it's still there, still bright and broken as ever. If the pain is ever going to fade for good, if he's ever going to regain the movement in his legs, then she will need to tease apart the knots around his spine. She'll have to dig down to the source of all the shattered energy before she can begin to repair it. Will he be able to withstand that? And even if he's strong enough, will she be able to bear it when he cries with the pain and reaches out for comfort? If tonight is any indication, probably not. If she could bear to see him in pain, she wouldn't still be holding him. It wouldn't be so difficult to think of leaving. Logically, she knows that she has to. She can't let Zuko see her face by daylight. And even if she wanted to take that risk, she'll need supplies from camp sooner or later. She's more than fulfilled her promise to stay until he falls asleep. She can leave him now if she wants to. But the thought of leaving him to wake alone and afraid after everything he's gone through bothers her more than she can ignore. She remembers the way he looked up at her, eyes dark in contrast with his skin, with tears streaming down both cheeks. I don't want to be alone. That was all he asked for. Not healing, not relief, just company. Surely she can give him that much, can't she? As carefully as she can, Katara turns sideways, pulling Zuko along with her until she can rest her back against the wall of the cave. His breath hitches and his mouth pulls into a harsh grimace, but he doesn't stir. With a slow sigh, she reclines and lets her fingertips trail through his hair before settling softly around his shoulders. Healing his back is going to be difficult. Maybe one of the most difficult things she's ever done. She doesn't know as much as she should about damaged nerves, and instinct can only lead her so far. The other trouble is that she doesn't know how far her healing should go. He's a firebender after all. One who has caused no end of trouble for her and her friends. One with a closer tie to the Fire Lord than any other. If she heals him, then he might make things worse. He might decide to begin hunting them again. He might send word back to his father and his sister and set them on her friend's trail. If she heals him well enough to walk again, he might follow her back to camp and ambush them himself. But if she doesn't heal him, then he'll never leave this cave again. Or if he does, if she leads the villagers to him and leaves Zuko in their care, then the strain of being moved could make everything worse. She's already seen what happens when he tries to use his legs. If the damage to his nerves causes him so much pain, then it might be kinder to end him than to leave him like this. Her eyes prickle as she looks down at the soft profile of his unscarred cheek. She can't do that. She can't imagine even considering it. Not after he's saved her life. Not when she can hardly look at him without remembering the time when he apologized for her mother's loss and extended a hand toward her. Maybe she was a fool for trusting him then. She's certainly a fool for trusting him now. But she can't abandon him. She can't give up on him. Maybe she can find some sort of middle ground. If she can heal his spine well enough that it stops hurting him, she can take him back to the village. Even if his legs don't work, they'll still take care of him. Won't they? The woman who Katara spoke to said that Zuko was one of the good ones. She seemed to care about Zuko. If he can't walk, surely someone will look after him. And if he can't walk when Katara leaves him with the villagers, then he won't be able to pursue her and her friends. She can be satisfied that he is safe without worrying about the threat that he might pose. That is, if her healing works. She knows what a spine is meant to feel like, but that doesn't mean she knows what is wrong with his. It doesn't mean that she'll be able to stitch the shreds back together into something whole, and it certainly doesn't mean that she can choose whether she mends his pain or his ability to move. All she knows for certain is that she'll have to open the knots of agonized energy in his back to even begin, and the process could be even worse than what he went through tonight. If she can't find a way to dull the pain before she begins healing him, she'll just end up holding him again, trying to comfort him while he cries. She'll tie the knots even tighter to give him a little relief, and she might never be able to make a real difference. Her hand strokes the back of his head again, and Zuko gives a small whimper in his sleep. There is medicine at camp, she thinks, from back when Aang was injured. That ought to be enough to help Zuko, or at least enough to start. If she's lucky, it might allow him to sleep while she works and spare him the pain and her the risk of being recognized. That's it. That's what she'll do. She just hopes that it will work. She finds the blanket that's fallen down around his waist and pulls it up to his shoulders again. She should leave, she thinks. It's late already, probably well past midnight, and she is helping no one by continuing to hold him. He can sleep just as well on the ground as he can tucked in against her side. But he's warm, and somehow the idea of moving him back to his makeshift bed sounds entirely too complicated. She'll hold him for just a minute longer, just until she figures out how to move him without waking him up or causing any further pain. Her eyes slip shut. When they open again, the sky is growing light, and Zuko is still there, his breath still steady against her skin. It takes a minute for Katara to remember why, and another minute longer to convince herself to move, to settle Zuko on the ground and tuck the blanket around his shoulders again. It's too close to sunrise. If she stays any longer, he's going to wake up and find her still here. He'll recognize her for certain. But she remembers his plea again, "Don't leave me," and hesitates. Though he looks peaceful now, his terrified face is all too clear in her mind. If he wakes up alone, he will be afraid. She hovers a moment before she wipes away what little remains of the messages scratched in the ground and etches out a new one. "I can't stay with you during the day. Take care of yourself, and I promise I'll be back after sunset."